Hello and welcome to Genetics Day 1, the first day of our new unit on genetics. How exciting. So we're going to be looking at Genetics Day 1. And today's aim is how are genotypes related to phenotypes? So this word genotype has something that you might recognize right there in the word. So genotypes refer to our genetics. So what is actually in your genes? Phenotypes, these new vocabulary words, refer to how you look. So genotypes is what's in your genes. The phenotypes is what presents on the outside. And they may be the same. Your genes may match how you look on the outside, but they may also be different. And this is why we have these two different terms that we're going to explore in this assignment and also in the classwork that we're going to do in class today on April 7th. So, for this first do now question, I'm really not going to go over this with you because this is what we are going to talk about. So fill in a sentence or more. What do you already know about genetics? Have you ever heard of Gregor Mendel? Have you ever heard of his pea experiments? What do you already know? So give me a sentence or so about what you already know about genetics. And then you're going to go ahead and watch. Pause this video and go ahead and watch Gregor Mendel, this video that is linked in your assignment. I can't play it on here, otherwise I will get my video taken down, but this is a video about Gregor Mendel and his pea experiments. It's only about 4 minutes and 41 seconds long, so please go ahead and pause this video, watch that video, and then come back here so we can finish your assignment. Okay, so hopefully you just watched that Gregor Mendel video. And let's go ahead and go through the answers to the questions. So, Mendel is considered the father of genetics. And this is because his pioneering research with these pea plants is what started our modern understanding of how genes actually work. So why did Mendel conduct these pea experiments? Well, it's not because he had nothing better to do and he was really bored, but rather he wanted to find different traits among pea plants. And peas had easily observable traits like the color of the flowers or the texture of the actual pods, wrinkled or round. And so they were a good subject, and he was able to replicate his experiment many times and actually observe these different traits. So he was using statistics to analyze genes, which is what we're going to do a little bit of during class. So what is a dominant gene? A dominant gene contains alleles which mask recessive genes. So a dominant gene, just like a dominant person, might take control of the phenotype, right? So a dominant gene is typically what we're going to see with the phenotype, whereas recessive genes might hide in the background, but they could appear in later generations, which is what Mendel discovered in his pea plant experiments. So what is a recessive gene? A recessive gene contains alleles that can be easily masked by dominant alleles, right? And again, you can think of that word dominant. We might use it to describe a person. So dominant, takes control, is the one that you see first. But recessive alleles, when they are in a homozygous recessive genotype, become apparent in the phenotype as well. So a homozygous gene or a homozygous genotype is when two identical alleles for a trait appear. For example, uppercase Y, which is dominant, or lowercase y, which is recessive. And we're going to do a lot of Punnett square practice. So if that is a little confusing to you, don't worry, we're going to talk more about it. And what is a heterozygous gene? So again, homo, right? Just like homosexual is two of the same, right? Two of the same sex, two of the same gene. Heterozygous, just like heterosexual, is two different. So a heterozygous genotype is when there are two different alleles for a trait. And typically in a heterozygous genotype, we're going to see the dominant trait in the phenotype. So an example of heterozygous would be uppercase Y, lowercase y, and let's say that trait is brown eyes. Even though they might have this lowercase y gene maybe for green eyes, what is going to show up in their genotype is going to be brown eyes. But then let's say two people with that genotype, uppercase y, lowercase y, have children. At least one of their children, or 25% of their likely children, and it's sort of like rolling the dice every time. So it could be the case that none of their children actually show up with this genotype. But when we do a Punnett square, you'll see what I mean. At least one, or 25%, we're going to be using statistics, would show up with that homozygous recessive genotype. So the two lowercase y genes. And in that case, we would have the recessive phenotype as well. So let's read a little bit more about these topics in our reading. So part B, genetics introduction reading. Children tend to look like their parents. Often a child may look more like one parent than the other. The study of how and why children look like their parents is called genetics. How we look is just a small part of our genetic heritage. Our genes influence the way our bodies work and thus our health. Dominant and recessive traits. We get one half of our genes from each parent, yet we may look more like one parent than the other. Why? Because of dominant genes or alleles. So one parent may have more dominant genes that are more apparent in our phenotype. A gene that governs a particular trait may come in alternative forms called alleles. Not all of the alleles that we inherit are shown or expressed. Some alleles, the dominant ones, cover the expression of the recessive alleles. So dominant alleles can cover the expression or the appearance of the recessive alleles. Like I said, you might have the genes in your body for green eyes or blue eyes, but brown eyes are dominant. So if you have even one copy of that dominant allele, you're gonna have brown eyes. But you could have a child that pops up with a trait. Some people say it skips a generation. Recessive traits are the ones that skip a generation because they can be masked by a dominant trait. A really good example of that is light-colored eyes and also red hair, which is recessive, but can show up in later generations if two individuals that have copies of that recessive allele have a child that inherits both recessive alleles. The recessive alleles don't disappear. They may show up in future generations when not paired with a dominant allele. When the same allele for a single gene is on both paired homologous chromosomes, the individual is homozygous for that trait. And remember, homo means the same, homozygous means they have two of the same allele. When the paired chromosomes carry different alleles for the same gene, they are said to be heterozygous. So these are the same words we just saw in that Gregor Mendel video, right? Homozygous, two of the same, heterozygous, two different. So you can either be homozygous recessive, two recessive alleles, or homozygous dominant, two dominant alleles. And let's just define that term. An allele is a variant of a gene. So let's say a particular gene, let's say one gene governs eye color, which it does. So there are multiple variants of that gene. And the different types, brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes, are the different alleles for eye color, right? But it's still one gene that governs eye color, but there are different variants of that gene. So that is what an allele is. Physical genetic traits. Hundreds of traits combine to determine appearance. A single gene determines some traits, like tongue rolling. That says wrong rolling, but tongue rolling. Others, like skin color, are determined by the combined effects of several genes. In the following procedure, which this is what we're going to do during class tomorrow, you will determine your phenotype. So again, this is not on this handout. This is what we're going to do tomorrow. The detectable expression of a gene, what is shown for several traits. Then you will determine your possible genotype, or the alleles in your genetic makeup for these traits. So we're going to look at the different traits and we're going to see what our possible genotypes are based upon the phenotype that we can see. So, and one last note. Oh, Physical genetic traits are our phenotypes, how we look. And the male sex chromosome, you're just going to fill in, is XY. So males genetically are XY. And remember, this is all in the most simplistic biological terms. There are actually many different variants, but typically the male chromosomal makeup is XY, and the female chromosomal makeup, just the sex chromosomes, is XX. Okay, so that's the last thing that you're going to write on your notes there. And this is the game that we're going to play in class tomorrow. So go ahead, complete that exit ticket, and you're all done for today, Genetics Day 1. Our aim today was how are genotypes related to phenotypes, and we learned this new vocabulary. Our genotype is what's in your genes, and our phenotype is how you look on the outside, or what is apparent on the outside or expressed. So all right, have a super fantastic day, guys, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.